Greetings. Welcome back to another episode of Well, Why Not? Today's episode is part of the series that I started last season, intended to kind of give a framework or a step-by-step guide to expatriation and what are some things you could do to just explore the option if you're not sure, and just learn more about the process as a whole. So let's jump right in. So I know for some people, traveling is something that is very much a part of their life, and they do it all the time. They love it, and they probably feel like they could live anywhere that they visit on a vacation. But that is a very dangerous way to choose a new home. And so I thought a lot about what somebody could do when visiting a place. And first off, I think if you are visiting a place with the intent of living there and making it your new home, it shouldn't be done in a vacation format. And I can get a little bit more into that with the tips that I have here. But it should be a little bit more deliberate. I think you should go to the place with the intent of living there and seeing it through that lens. Because I do believe that anything that you're doing that you know is temporary and has an end date, there's a different feel to it, and you're going to see things in a different light. If you're going with the idea of, could I do this forever? And even, and forever is a strong word. Could I do this for a few years? Could I do this for a year? I think a year is way too short a time not to live somewhere. I have done it. I have lived somewhere for a year, but I do feel like the place that I did live for only a year, France, I only knew so much. As much as I felt very comfortable and very in the know. I mean, I lived, a full year, so the 4 seasons, and you do get a good glimpse, but I definitely don't feel like I know or knew as much as I do about places that I've lived for 2+ years. So one of the first tips that I have when you are going to this potential new home, and I don't know how else to phrase it. I do feel that there are places that we always will feel that are home to us, but you can also have temporary other homes in the course of your life, especially if you expatriate. So I'd say the first thing, or the first tip, is to arrive with respectful curiosity. I think this applies a lot to Americans, just because culturally we are very curious people. We ask a lot of questions. And so I think it's also important to be mindful of what is considered disrespect. There is a level of curiosity that is offensive to other cultures. So as much as you can, I know that it's somewhat nuanced, and it's hard to, look up or Google that and find out, okay, what level of curiosity is offensive to Argentinians, but maybe if you do know other people or other locals who are in your vicinity, or maybe even online now, reach out to somebody, a local online, several, I think sometimes there's a lot of pressure put on people. I get this all the time. Like when somebody has a question specific to Haiti, and I feel like, who am I to speak for all Haitians? So I'm very careful to mention, like, this is my own experience from my own upbringing within my own family, and that just to let people know, like, I cannot speak for all Haitians. So again, it's a good idea if you can reach out to several locals and just potentially, if possible, have that conversation and say, hey, I'm thinking about visiting and I wanted to get some insight about the culture, and then try to kind of gauge what you can and cannot ask. Another thing I think about having a respectful curiosity or level of curiosity is the way that we phrase our questions. Again, there are sometimes clear lines of you do not ask certain questions. For instance, definitely asking somebody how much money they make. Like that's, I think, almost universal. It's not something that you should ask a stranger or somebody that you are getting to know. But you know what's funny? Even asking, and I feel like I've mentioned this on previous episodes too, asking somebody what they do for a living is odd to a lot of cultures outside of the US. And I have been in settings outside of the US where an American comes and then is speaking sometimes to another American, but sometimes to a local. And like question about, I was like, what's your name? Oh, cool. Are you from here, or where do you live? And then it's, what do you do? And I've even seen Americans who are pretty well traveled get a little put off by that. It's like, what does that have to do with anything? And I definitely understand that in the US, your profession is closely tied to a lot of other things. Like people connect your profession to your social class, your interests potentially. They I think we think we can read a lot into a person by their line of work, and that's just not the case. In other places, especially in Latin America, your work is just your work. You don't live to work, you work to live. So I could have some random job and it has nothing to do with my personality or my interests or anything about me as a person. So yeah, again, those questions that really just have no place. But I do think sometimes our questions can also take a critical tone. And I'm going to give some examples. So one is, people, the question of punctuality, right? Again, one of my favorite sayings, and I'm sure I've said it before on previous episodes about how Americans have watches and the rest of the world has time. So I've often heard people complain, Americans, Canadians, I don't know, Europeans to some extent, depending on where they're from, like the Nordic countries, yes. But I don't know, I feel like, the Spanish can be very flexible with punctuality as well. But asking a question like, why is everybody always late? It has a critical tone. And since I hear it so often, I think a better way to ask is there a lot of traffic here? Like, is there, yes, it is true. People do not, if you have, a meeting or anything or an event and it, for a certain time, you could sort of tack on like a good hour to that time as to when people will really be arriving. And there's a lot of factors. So I think it's more helpful to determine what those factors are. Because I think once you understand that, then you just learn to adjust. You're not going to change a culture. You're not going to get people to get on your clock. But if you know, there's a lot of traffic, then I need to plan ahead. I can expect, especially certain days of the week, that people will be a little later than usual because they will be late. And I think it's just also accepting the time that you give as like a start time is more of like a suggestion because people just don't see time the same way. I don't know how to explain it. And it took me a while. Of course, initially it was frustrating for me as well. But then once I started understanding those factors, or someone, maybe they're coming from work and then they're waiting for a colleague or they're waiting for somebody to give them a ride. Not everybody has their own transportation, and public transportation is relied upon a lot. And that's not at all like clockwork. It's not like the, New York Metro. Actually, even that, there's always, I always hear complaints about, the New York subway but just think about it, that, and then add on 50 other things. It's a little bit chaotic. So anyway, all that to say that it is just better to approach these questions with a bit of inquisitiveness, if that's a word, but instead of being critical and coming off as you don't like or you don't agree with what is. Another example is this is specific to Ecuador because they do eat guinea pig called cuy, and it is a very traditional dish, especially amongst indigenous communities and in rural areas. So, seeing that question of like, why do they eat guinea pig? Because, and I totally understand it also coming from an American, because it's considered a pet in American culture. And again, a better way to ask about people eating guinea pig would be, is this dish traditional to your culture? And then finding out more about that. Like, okay, how did that come to be and why and what is this linked to? And I assure you, it's a very interesting story. It's a very complex. I mean, if you get somebody who actually knows the history of it. But again, it's not to say that you will then start eating guinea pig or you will think that it's the greatest thing because you get an explanation of where it originated from. But it's just a better way to find out more. And that's my point in how we go about understanding other cultures or other communities. It doesn't need to come off with a tone of judgment. And then last example, and this is another one that I often hear amongst expats is, why are people so loud at night? So yes, there is a very lively, especially like Thursday through Saturday. There are a lot of festivities. So depending on where you live, especially if you're living in a city, I think actually in some of the rural areas, probably worse because the homes, the acoustics, they're not like buildings or anything. And if, your neighbor is having a party, it will feel like you are attending that party because the music is so loud. And I think that is a big difference. Like we have like noise complaints and there's laws in certain cities in the US about the level of noise. And yeah, if that exists in Latin America, it is not at all observed. People are, I don't even want to say allowed because they don't ask for permission. It just is, it is very much a part of the culture that you have a party or you have, loud music and you hang out with your friends, just starting Thursday. Not to say Thursday is the start of the weekend, but it sort of is. And instead of asking, that type of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how loud people are at night. Why are they so loud at night? I think a better question or a better way to phrase that is the nightlife this active all year round? Because especially if it's a place that you're considering moving to and making your new home, you want to know, like, am I going to be able to sleep through parties 3 days a week, potentially? And sometimes it's just seasonal. Sometimes, by asking that, is the nightlife this active all the time, then you can get a sense of, oh, no, this is, November through December, it's for the holidays, or in the summer, it's only around this time. Or you may get a yes. Like this is just a lively area and it's pretty loud. I've actually seen people have to move because of the noise. And also there's, just latent like city like noises like honking and, people talking that just, noise rises. And again, it's best to ask in a way that, again, is not judgmental and will also get you the relevant information to making your decision. Another thing I just wanted to mention when you're asking questions, I often hear people, start almost like an interview, with a random local, and as the local, and you find, many of them are very kind and open to answering questions. But what frustrates me is sometimes as they start answering those questions that the response will be like, interesting. Okay. And I just, to me, it just sounds so disingenuous. It sounds like it really isn't interesting. It's just you have this boilerplate answer to anything that you don't quite understand or that you don't really care about. And I always think, oh, wouldn't it be nicer to say something like, oh, that's beautiful, thank you for sharing that with me. And then if appropriate, and if you have, if the person is still willing to share, I'd like to hear more about that. I just think there are ways that also we can go into situations where you want to learn more, because it's always, I don't know, I always feel like it is somewhat of a take situation. You're not giving much. You're not, you're extracting. And what are you providing in return? And also the more, I think that's another piece of it, even if the person is not necessarily asking you questions as well, but sharing a little bit. And then I say all these tips about asking questions, if at all possible. I think it's always best to ask them in the local language, even if you just are learning. If you have to practice, how to say it now, the risk of that is that you're getting the answers and you're not going to fully understand them. But I just think that people appreciate the attempt. And then, if they are, and if you're, obviously if you really cannot or do not understand, finding somebody who is bilingual is also a good option, but it still applies where even if the person is bilingual and is sharing all of this with you, like for you to share a little bit about yourself too. I don't know. I think it makes us better humans and makes the interaction a lot richer. The next tip that I have about identifying a potential new home is to just spend time observing. I know, going to a new place, I'm the same way. You want to see everything, you want to do everything, you want to experience everything it has to offer. But you also have to keep in mind, living somewhere, you're probably not going to be doing those things. I've gone to visit, even in the US, you go to visit new cities and you do all the quote unquote touristy things. I do this often when I go to LA. And I know that that's not daily life. I know that. And for some reason, sometimes when people go visit other countries especially, they do all those touristy things, but they equate that to daily life and think, oh, I could totally live here. This place is awesome. No, I'd say try to observe spaces that you would most likely frequent. So if you're a person that likes to go to a cafe, then spend a lot of time in those places. If you're a person that knows that you're going to be a homebody, spend time wherever you're staying temporarily, spend time indoors. And especially if you're trying to get a feel for a neighborhood and thinking, oh, I could probably, if I'm going to live here, this is the area I'd like to live. Be at home, whether it's, and then obviously in those cases, it's best if you could get an Airbnb to give you the most authentic feeling of home versus a hotel, because they usually do a pretty good job with their soundproofing, and you may not get a good feel for what the noise is like and what kind of activities and what the day, like during the day, could you sit at home if that's what your preference is and read. If you like to be outdoors and hiking, do that, so again, it's the idea is to mimic what your real life would be. Do not assume that you have what you most prefer to do currently is going to drastically change in a new place. I think that's a myth. Sometimes people think, I only like to do these things because I live here. No, you like to do those things because you like to do those things. So they may get adjusted a little bit. They may adapt to the new environment, but most likely you'll consider doing those things that you enjoy doing, which is great. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. And maybe you do, you didn't like to be outdoors a lot because of the climate you lived in, and now you're in better weather and you go outdoors a little more. That is a possibility as well. But I think sometimes people think that they're going to have this brand new life doing very different things and having very different passions just because the geography has changed. And I find that more often than not, that's not true. So again, there's a lot of expats who will leave cities because they realize the traffic was too loud. Well, if you had spent time in the city and doing the things you like doing most, which if you like being in your home, or even maybe if you like being in a park and the park is surrounded by major avenues or something like that, then it may not be something that you enjoy doing as much as on the surface it sounds like you would like to do it. But I think just living in those spaces and observing and doing it not necessarily to enjoy all the newness, but also with the eye of, I'm going to observe this and see if it's something that I would really, really like every day, not just for a couple weeks. And then my last piece of advice is to talk to like-minded individuals and bold like-minded, because I find, again, sometimes when expats or tourists, they get into the journalist mode and they want to talk to locals and find out what they like and don't like. It's fine, it's great, it's helpful, but does that person have a similar lifestyle? So if you're a retired expat, or if you're looking to be a retired expat, talking to a backpacker is not going to be very helpful to you, or talking to somebody who's in university, if you're speaking to somebody who loves hiking or who loves the outdoors, when you like museums and you like to go to art galleries, it's just not helpful. I think it's information, but as it relates to whether this place would be a good fit for you, that's where it's not helpful. I'm not saying not to do it. I like to talk to random people. I like to know different perspectives, but I also filter that information knowing that this person has a very different lifestyle than me. So maybe they like something or they recommend something, and I know off the bat it's not a good recommendation for me and my lifestyle. And same goes for if you're going to be if you're a young family, with small children, it's not helpful to ask a retired expat, what's it like here? Do you like doing this? Do that? It's, I just think to really get information that could help you make your decision and make an informed decision, it's best to find people just with just a similar, obviously we're all different and we have different interests, but it's all lifestyle related, right? So again, if I'm going to need to, if I'm a young family, I'm going to need to know about good schools. I'm going to be looking for very different things than somebody who is retired and has a lot of free time and doesn't necessarily need to look at school quality or activities for young children. So those are my top 3 tips in finding a potential new home. And if you are privileged enough and have the opportunity to visit several places, because I think also the danger is, you get to one place and you think you love it, but you don't compare it. And again, sometimes you don't have that opportunity. You don't have the resources to do that. But I believe that helps you make a better decision, because you do have a baseline, or you have something that you can, or several, options that you can consider and do the pros and cons for all the options. And I think in the end, you'll feel better. We always know there's a risk. You may not like where you think you're going to like, but you've done your due diligence and looked at all the different aspects and points that will improve, hopefully, the quality of your life and make you a happier person. All right, so that's it for this episode. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for tuning in. Till the next time, be well.